It's also fortuitous that we watched this with Pi. That was also just a coincidence. I just suggested that we sort of bookend Aronofsky, his latest film and his first film, which is really a rough student film, Pi. And it's fascinating because these films, basically, this film takes place in 1998. And that is around the time when Aronofsky was filming Pi. And he actually grew up in Brooklyn, but I would presume as he got older, he might have gone and lived in the Lower East Side for a little bit. There are actually a lot of scenes that are maybe even, I would actually say, conscious reenactments of Pi. So I think Darren Aronofsky's...
But it also has touches of The Wrestler as well, right?
Yeah,
Because he's
definitely.
similar. Now, he has a better outcome than The Wrestler, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
He's not made the sacrifice as the Wrestlers made the sacrifice. Natalie Portman's character, Natalie Portman's character is made a sacrifice in The Black Swan. This character doesn't appear to be made a sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
He appears to sacrifice the Jews effectively,
He
right?
steals home at the end, for the baseball metaphor. He kind of gets away with it, which is remarkable. But anyway, so there's a scene where he's being chased by the Hasidic Jewish mobsters through a convenience store, which it's probably not the same store, but it's just a mirroring of a very similar scene in Pi. I think that was probably conscious. Also, when he sort of, in the hero's journey where he hits rock bottom and all is lost, he actually takes the bus to Coney Island, and he's at the same beach where the protagonist of Pi is. Just sort of like you're at the end of the world, basically. If New York is a world, this is it. This is the edge of it. And he sort of hits rock bottom and then admits some harsh truths about himself and picks himself up and then turns the tables on these horrible gangsters. So this film, I'll just mention, is based on a novel. And the novelist is named Charlie Houston. And I had never heard of Charlie Houston before. But apparently he is a rather successful novelist, and he's written some comic books as well and done some other things. And Charlie Houston is given sole credit for the screenplay. However, I think that giving him credit for the screenplay on Aronofsky's part was a sort of hat tip, token to credit this man with coming up with the character and the story. This sort of interesting guy who's kind of reminds me of Fletch, the ne'er-do-well detective. He's a baseball fan, ne'er-do-well, kind of screwed up big time, but is also redeemable and attractive and relatable and so on. So I think that was sort of a hat tip to Charlie Houston, because there are some very interesting naming conventions, and then also there are just striking differences from the novel that I don't think Charlie Houston would have made without the influence of Darren Aronofsky. Now, again, I admit I've not read the novel. I just learned about the novel's existence last night, actually. But I've looked up these major differences. There's a bit of a time difference. So the novel takes place in 2000. This takes place in 1998. I don't know if that's significant. Maybe it just centers it around Pi. It's like Pi's Black Mirror, or Pi's photographic negative or something. Who knows?
The other similarity is on maybe just a purely aesthetic level, but there could even be a deeper symbolic emphasis that that Aronofsky's making. But the detective is remarkably similar to the one of the antagonists in Right, and Black Woman,
who are playing Aryans. Interestingly, as well.
Maybe they're representing a kind of decline of an Aryan empire.
Yeah,
right.
This is where this is something
Rome has become black, effectively, or Rome has fallen.
This is something that that Mark has stressed, and I would even resist this years ago, when I was once a student, you really have to focus on the naming convention, because sometimes, not always, but very often, your eyes can deceive you. The screenplay writer or the director can be signifying who the antagonist is, say, through names, and you sometimes, like, it's a black woman that just, that's sort of an image. It's a mask, basically. It's a red herring. And the fact that she is Inspector Roman or Sergeant Roman, whatever she is. Now, in the book, I also learned that she is an Italian male. So make of that what you will. There are also some interesting changes. So the big bads, the Drucker brothers, are blacks in the book. And Aronofsky's film, they are Hasidic Jews. Now, again, do these two changes, are they just sort of politically correct changes, maybe? Perhaps that had something to do with it. But I think they really add to the gem. And I think this is something where Aronofsky, he finds something, and he sort of curates it. He finds a novel that is really good. It's got something going on, and he sort of sees symbolism that might not have been intended by the author. And he either changes a little thing here or there, or he emphasizes something and de-emphasizes something else and turns it into a gem parable. And I think he definitely did that on this one.
And we can say that, I mean, it's not just Aronofsky, it's Spielberg, it's Jews doing adaptations of books.
Kubrick.
Right. So in other words, they're attracted to the book because of story elements and symbol elements, but sometimes even names, right? So in other words, because it's an adaptation doesn't mean necessarily that the naming convention isn't there.
Right.
It's just that the names occurred in a kind of more organic way in the source material, and that became an attractive feature of the source material because that was one more thing that they didn't have to change. And maybe also it sort of got Aronofsky's imagination going because he was thinking about the name symbolically, whereas maybe even the original author was not even thinking about the name symbolically. That's possible. But I think assuming that to be the case, I think that the names carry tremendous meaning, and that would sort of corroborate this idea that, okay, well, yeah, he didn't come up with the names himself, but he saw them out in the wild, and he said, okay, I can take this and maybe I can curate it a little. And he does change a number of names of characters in the film, as Richard's been pointing out.
Mm-hmm.
So we start to see the process here, right? But it becomes another layer of obfuscation. It becomes another layer of mystery, essentially, because then, if people start thinking there's a kind of Jewish message or something in a film, someone can say, well, actually, but the source material is, a Gentile writer. So
mm-hmm.
how can this be have Jewish names or whatever?
Yeah.
In any case, I'll let you continue.
Yeah, so I'll just start describing some things, and just to make sure we're all on the same page, and then we can move forward. So this, again, it's a 3-part book. You actually get to travel along Hank Thompson's journey over 3 books with Charlie Houston, and who knows, maybe Aronofsky will make a sequel. But our protagonist is Hank Thompson. And real quick, James, do you have a question you want to jump in, or?
It's not even a question. It's just a corroboration between Pi and Caught Stealing.
Oh, good, yeah.
Where Aronofsky in both films portrays these religious Jews as kind of being like the loser, or he's sort of taking a shot at Hasids, or like the rabbi in Pi.
Yeah,
they come out. Obviously in Pi they lose to the secular Jew, and in this film they are, in essence defeated by the Gentile,
by Esau. Yeah,
but
I mean,
both films he's kind of taking a shot at the religious order, or the overly Jewish,
overly
Jew.
formal,
and
superficial, thus Jews. Yeah. So anyway, our protagonist is Hammerin' Hank Thompson. He's a baseball phenom, and he has this terrible event in his life where he is drunk driving with his teammate, and he's wearing a seatbelt, his teammate's not, and he both effectively kills. I mean, he's sort of responsible, sort of kind of, for the death of his friend, and he also destroys his knee, and so he could never play baseball. And it's indicated that he was going to go, 15th in the draft or number 1 in the draft. Who knows? But it all got ruined. And then he is living for 10 years, apparently, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And I guess for any Zoomers on our panel here, so New York was a different place back in the 80s. In the 90s, it was really changing, and they got at a lot of this. But just go watch the musical Rent. It used to, it's funny, when that musical came out, the Lower East Side had already been like gentrified and ruined. But the neighborhoods in Lower Manhattan were edgier. There were more homeless people on the street. There were more drug users. There were more flailing odd artists, living together. It was maybe cooler. But also definitely rougher. And over the course of the 90s, really, Giuliani was enacting, I guess the beginnings of stop and frisk for people in the boroughs in Times Square. But also he was facilitating this gentrification of New York, which might have happened without him. Who knows? And the broken windows policing of, you want to police the small things so that people don't even try the big things, sort of the philosophy. And you actually saw that they're in this dive bar where people are drunk and doing drugs and stuff. And there's the no dancing ordinance, which actually was a Giuliani thing. So they definitely get at some of this fun stuff. But anyway, he is basically a loser deadbeat, just hanging out in the Lower East Side. He seems to have a budding love relationship with Yvonne, who played by Zoe Kravitz, and she is an ER nurse. I don't know if it's significant or not, but she bragged about, I saved one today, an overdose. When they first meet, and they're young kids having sex and drinking and so on. His neighbor is Russ, who they depict as this aging punk rocker, in 1998, but it looks like he's living in 1978. And he's got the mohawk, etc. And he wants Hank or Harry to take care of his apartment and take care of his cat. And next thing you know, you learn that Russ is in a lot of trouble. He's got about $4 million in cash in a storage facility, and all the people who are going to divvy it up are trying to get their piece of it. And so there's the Russian mobsters, there's what are they, Puerto Rican gangsters who are involved, and the police woman who he starts to work with. Yes, the Puerto Rican's named Colorado. I mean, the police woman he starts to work with is named Roman. She is the law. He trusts her, but soon he finds out that she is just as corrupt, maybe more corrupt than these gangsters whom she's policing. And she warns him about the big bads, these terrible killers who are Hasidic Jews, who are in the in the Lower East Side, just murdering people, cutting their eyes out. Interesting, with reckless abandon. And so basically, in the litter box, Hank finds a little key which he thinks must be significant. It's been hidden by Russ, the punk rocker. And all of these people are searching him. They're beating him up. They burst a kidney. So he actually has this large wound in his side. Interesting. And they even kill his girlfriend, Yvonne, brutally execute her. And it's really at that point where Hank realizes he's in deep shit. Russ comes back, and they Russ and Hank try to flee these gangsters, and eventually Hank is just at the end of his rope. He's out in Coney Island. Everyone wants to kill him, including the police. What can he do? He admits to himself that he is responsible. It wasn't just an accident. I am responsible for both murdering my friend and destroying my baseball career. And, I didn't even care about my friend. I was just so mad about baseball. And he finally admits this to himself. And he's a flawed character, but it is redeeming, I would say, that he can do that. And once he admits that to himself, he faces his fear. He's able to turn the tables on the gangsters. So he links up with these big bads, the Hasidic Jewish gangsters, and he basically tells them Roman has the key. So you need to go in there and kill Roman, and then we can get the key, and I'll give you the money. I just want to be left alone. And they don't fully trust him, so they actually lock him in the car with some zip ties. He's able to use the lighter to get out of his zip ties, a fire, so to speak. I don't know if that's significant, but it might be, probably is. And he eventually confronts Roman and wins and beats her, stabs her in the foot with a broken baseball bat. And then the Jewish gangsters come in at the end and put her away. And then he tells them, no, she actually doesn't have the key. I have the key, and I can take you to the money. And he's in the van, and you get the sense that the Hasidic gangsters are actually going to do him a favor, that usually they would just kill this person because he knows too much. But he also has done them a mitzvah, a favor. He's been good to them. He seems like a good boy who cares about his mom. So maybe we're just going to let him off this one time. And then Hank notices that the Jew is using the lighter of Yvonne, his sometime girlfriend. And he wants to get revenge on these people who killed this innocent girl. But I think he also wants to just close the loop, reach total closure by killing everyone involved in the scheme. And thus he reenacts the trauma of his earlier life, and he willfully drives the van into it looks like the pole for supporting an overground subway, and kills both of these Hasidic gangsters, and then disguises himself as the dead punk rocker Russ, and goes off to paradise. Gives his mom half of the $4 million, gives his mom $2 million to live on, takes the rest of it. And it's interesting. One of the themes is that he's just obsessed with baseball, obsessed with the San Francisco Giants. He's a California kid. And at the end of the film, he actually turns off the game and rises to a new level of consciousness or awareness, perhaps. But anyway, there's my summary of the film, just so we're on the same page. But do you want to add anything there, Mark, or should we maybe talk about Harry? That was sort of the naming choice that I found most interesting.
Harry. All right. Yeah, no, go.
So there is a region called Seir, which is basically Edom, and the region of the Edomites.
A city in Edom. Yeah.
Yes, a city in Edom called Seir. And it's also a kind of pun on Harry, which is the way that Esau is described. And he's Hank, he's Henry, he's Harry. I think that this might be been a fortuitous naming that Aronofsky found, but for someone like Aronofsky, I think he jumped on it and amplified it. I do think that there are a lot. You could see a little bit of Jesus or the Messiah ben Joseph in Thompson, particularly the side wound. I found that significant. But I think the way I think he's Esau, and so that Seir is an interesting pun associating Esau with Edom, which will be done directly later on in the Bible. And I think it's a very fortuitous name for this character. There's also a way in which Thompson's big problem is that he gave up his birthright. He wasn't really tricked out of it as Esau is in the Bible with Jacob, but he squandered it much like Esau. He could have been a superstar in the major leagues, and he just fucked it up for no good reason. It's a very sad story, but if I were to associate this character with a biblical figure, it definitely would be Esau. And again, the fact that this movie is sort of Esau's revenge, like Esau triumphant, is very interesting. That it was made by Darren Aronofsky, but that's how I see that character. I don't know what you think about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely he's a Gentile coded character. I think that he's clearly a Gentile, right? So, so the other thing I would say too is that name Henry or Harry, which the original meaning of Harry is like is a nickname for Henry essentially, and Henry means something like ruler or something like this, but it has a kind of aristocratic suggestion. But I've noticed that just naming conventions where names like Patrick, which mean patrician essentially, references to nobility are generally assigned to Gentile characters. That's a kind of trend. Now, I'm sure you can find exceptions, but sometimes those exceptions are modified by other clues. For example, right? Yeah, I mean, I look. The other thing too is notable about his name is that I think that he's also indicated basically a Christian character, and I think that there's a metaphor about Christianity in this film where it's in some way it's comparing it would seem to the cult of Bacchus or to alcohol, essentially, right? And it points to so essentially he at least begins as a kind of Christian character where he's a sort of good-natured guy, but he's decadent and kind of wandering, not really going anywhere in his life. I think Richard characterized it very well, but he's fundamentally a good guy, but he's a sort of a lovable loser. He's a lovable loser, essentially. And he doesn't really have the kind of meanness I guess he'll eventually develop to succeed. Or at least in that moment, right, when he's driving the car. But the other clues would be that it's Paul's bar, right? And Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles. Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles. So that could be one clue. And the other clue would be the last name, Thompson, right? Thomas is the twin of Christ. So we could read that as Christian. The last name is Christian, right?
Yeah.
And what would come is in my view, what would come as strong corroboration of it, because I think a lot of these Jews were like comic book nerds and they were all reading Stan Lee because so much of this, it just bristles with Gem. And you could learn Gem by reading Stan Lee. I mean, that's how I fucking learned Gem. And or that was one of the ways in which I learned Gem. And so, but there we have this kind of antagonist of Spider-Man or Peter Parker, Flash Thompson. So he has the same last name. And there it's indicated kind of esoterically. And interestingly enough, Flash Thompson also ends up being a drunk, right? That becomes his vice. He becomes a drunk. He goes to war and he becomes a drunk. Now, I don't know if in that context that becomes a metaphor for Christianity as this kind of intoxication or drunkenness or something, right? Drunkenness of the spirit, we might say. Maybe that's a metaphor that's going on here. I think that's definitely how I view Christianity, as a kind of drunkenness or intoxication of the spirit, right? So that's how I view it. And again, it comes from the Eucharist. It comes from Bacchus's cup, right? There's this whole wine metaphor in Christianity where to commune with Jesus, you're literally drinking alcohol, right? So it's that's the way I understand an important aspect of the Christian metaphor, and maybe that's what he's kind of indicating in this film. And the other thing too, I would say about this character Flash Thompson. Now I'm using this Spider-Man character to kind of make the point about this character in the Aronofsky film, but I think it's worth looking at Flash Thompson for a second here. The whole joke with Flash Thompson is, so first of all, you have Spider-Man, and what does Spider-Man represent? Well, he he's a Jew, like he's a crypto Jew. Jews have like, uh, there's a Israeli producer who's produced all the Spider-Man films, and he has articles, you can look him up, where he's just like, yeah, of course Spider-Man's a Jewish character, right? And
Right.
and they give little clues in the article as to symbols that are signifying his Jewishness and so forth. But what Spider-Man is ultimately, he's more complex than just being a Jewish character. He's ultimately represents something Christian, or at least his superhero identity represents something Christian. He's the web slinger, right? And what is the web slinger? Well, the web slinger is the fisher of men. It's Saint Peter, Peter Parker. That's the metaphor going on with Spider-Man. So what happens with Flash Thompson and Peter Parker? Well, Flash Thompson's like this bully, and he's like one of these sort of Gentile stereotypes. In the other one is like sort of the rich Gentile who's Harry Osborn, right? So he's the jock. He's like sort of the more common goy who's just irritating, and he's the jock. And his name is Flash Thompson, and he bullies Peter Parker. Though, actually, it's funny when you read the comic. He's like not that bad. He's actually kind of a good. He's like not that bad a guy. But Peter Parker still has this sort of Jewish like kind of vendetta or whatever. But Flash Thompson, we talked about bullying sometimes being jocular or a way of like trying to include people and stuff. When I've looked at those parables, it almost feels like that's more what Flash Thompson is doing. He's trying to awkwardly befriend this sort of crypto Jewish character. But Flash Thompson, one of the metaphors that kind of established him as a Christian is that he's the one who sets up the Spider-Man fan club at the school. So he's like a huge Spider-Man fan. He bullies Peter Parker, who's the Jew, and he venerates Spider-Man, who is this Christian character, who is Saint Peter, who is Catholicism or Christianity or whatever. And the whole time, Peter Parker is kind of laughing to himself, like, this moron doesn't realize that it's me who's Spider-Man, right?
Yeah.
That you're worshiping a Jew. That's what he doesn't realize. That's what Flash Thompson doesn't realize. And
it's just Christian anti-Semitism. Basically.
Yeah, and here we have a character
Jewish nerd at my school that like he will never understand holy Jesus, my savior.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
something funny about it. Yeah.
No, it is funny. It's a brilliant little. The Stan Lee came up with this little metaphor, and so meanwhile he's being a dick to Peter Parker, but then he has the fan club and is completely like, simping, as they say, for Spider-Man, and Peter Parker is just kind of laughing about it, right? And I think that's what Jews do on some level when people are Christian anti-Semites. It's risible to be a Christian anti-Semite. You worship a Jew. You started the Spider-Man fan club,
Yes. Yeah.
And Peter Parker could easily
also, Peter, the web might be a fishing metaphor.
Yeah,
like
no, that's what it is.
Slinger casting a wide net. And so,
that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. It's Peter. It's Saint Peter, the fisher of men. He's the fisher of men. So that's the metaphor, and it's just so I would use that as corroboration that probably he's thinking the same with this name Henry Thompson. So he's a Christian, and he's an alcoholic. He's imbibing the spirit, as it were. And then Saint Paul is the apostle to the Gentile, and he's the bartender. So I don't know. I mean, I think that there is that element, and it's basically he's esoterically indicating Christianity as a kind of form of decadence, a form of weakening and harming, essentially. Though he also, like, his two vices basically are sports, right? The guy's addicted to sports, and he's addicted to alcohol. Those are the two vices of the guy.
Yes, the plague of jocks everywhere. Yes.
In that last vice, or the one with sports, I disagree with that. I mean, I think that men
being joking here, but yeah.
Well, no. I mean, I think
you can obviously get too obsessed with anything, but
absolutely, yeah. And many people have become too obsessed with sports. definitely the case.
Yeah. But it's also his greatest it's also his greatest advantage, or his superpower, if you will. I mean, I think a lot of what the movie did well was they show his like baseball skills were integrated into the action sequences. So he's like running away from the Hasidic Jews, and it's almost like he's stealing home, or like at one point he like slides and the Jews can't do that. I mean, I thought that was well integrated. And again, he triumphs because he gets rid of the alcohol, but then sort of rediscovers being a willful jock. You know, again, after having the epiphany of like taking responsibility for what he's done, he then sort of like rediscovers his jock self, and that's how he wins in the end.